since that time, I wrote that book called The Future of the Internet and How to Stop It. I find myself working on a sequel called Well, We Tried, and thinking about just how much the generative character of our digital network has invited so many problems that I think we really have to confront head on rather than wishing them away. And these days that includes, particularly if we're looking at social networking in particular, harassment, disinformation, political fragmentation, decrease in trust among people. And even as we identify and look squarely at these problems, there are so many questions around, well, who should intervene to do anything about them, especially since so many of the umbrellas under which they are taking place and generating for some profit are privately held. And how much do we want private industry to be shaping speech, especially speech that would be, in the American context, prescribed for the government to shape? It'd be against the First Amendment, and yet somehow we're hoping that the corporate substitutes here would wade into it, and even they have been understandably reluctant.
Anyone can say anything, right? I think that's fundamentally different than what we had many years ago. But it's not just anyone can say anything in a way that gets amplified and goes viral. So I'd refer to this as the phenomenon that everyone is a media company today. That by itself doesn't create the problem, right? The problem arises when things get amplified with an advertising model, which is going to favor certain kinds of content that basically gives rise to what we might call markets for sensationalism or markets for lies even, right? By the way, what's sobering is competition, which we normally think of as a good thing, in fact, I think makes the problem worse. Because imagine a world where, every organization decides not to amplify what we might call misinformation. Then there are really strong incentives for one organization to break that coalition. And that basically sort of undermines everything. The real reason, I think, why we amplify misinformation is because there's a demand for it, right? And ultimately, it's readers and viewers and consumers who, in fact, like to watch this. And so when you sort of start peeling the onion there, it's the fact that we like surprises, and there's articles about this. We like sensationalism, and perhaps most importantly, we like to watch and read and see things we believe in, right? This is the confirmation bias that we often hear about.
Pick a particular piece of technology that you thought was going to end up one way, which ended up in a different way, this sort of unintended consequence.
The Sony Camcorder. I thought it was a fantastic example of both a commercial and economic success story. Here, it's 1983. The first portable handheld camcorder comes to the market. It's the first time a consumer can buy a battery-operated device that records both video and sound. By 1991, many of the ways that Sony had started evolving the Sony Camcorder that fit in one hand was by being able to record really great video in low light conditions. And this was the one thing that was going to continue to keep them ahead of their competitors. So in 1991, a plumber had a Sony Camcorder. He hears police cars that are completely across the lot from the place he lives, through the trees, across a major highway. On the other side of the highway, he pulls out his Sony Camcorder and he begins recording what he sees. What he sees, this is 1991, is a black man being beaten by these police officers. It's the story of Rodney King. And when the first time I saw that video, the biggest question I had in my mind was, where the heck did that video come from? Why would the police just let themselves be recorded by it? And what had really happened was, this is an amazing example of how good that camcorder was. It looked to me as if it was shot by a news camera that had been right there on the scene. And of course, it ignites the entire issue around citizen journalism, and we've seen the trajectory of that. That would be the unexpected. But there's also the unforeseen. So at the time the Sony Camcorder hit American shores, American jurisprudence had already decided that it was okay to record people's video in public, their photographic image, but it wasn't okay to just record their sound. You needed permission. But the Sony Camcorder didn't have a mute button. There was no way for a person not to record both the sound along with the video. And right away, questions came up. There was a woman who taped one of those things to her child, and it recorded lots of atrocities happening on a school bus. She takes the tape down to the local law enforcement, and they arrest her for illegal wiretapping. There was a protest here in Boston. The protester was being arrested. One of the bystanders pulls out a Sony camcorder, begins recording the police arresting him. The police stop arresting the protester. They turn around and arrest the guy with the camcorder, and he's faced 7 years in prison. Now we fast forward to today. Pennsylvania has a law that requires a video camera on every school bus that records video and sound. The ACLU fought that case and won us all the right to record the police in the service of their duties in public. This is a situation where a simple design decision, a mute button, which was actually an arbitrary design decision, we ended up changing our laws because of it.